85 pounds, a stout, heavily built, but strong and healthy man. He was in his 40s when he first saw a white man, a battalion of U.S. Army Dragoons, the country's first mounted infantry unit that marched in the summer of 1835 to scout Iowa after the Black Hawk Purchase. In 1832, that good area in U.S. control. The march led to establishment of outposts, traveled up the Des Moines River from Fort Des Moines to Fort Dodge. I've got some things mapped, but I'm not going to. Anyway, the chief was in his 50s when the first settlers pushed into Marshall County, where he was born. That was when the chief of what was left of various Potawatomi, Meskwaki, Fox, and Sauk nations made an important decision. Unlike Chief Black Hawk and Keokuk, he would seek accord, compromise, and friendship with the white man. He was the friend of the white man. He may have done this for preservation after seeing what had happened to other tribes that opposed the white man. His friendship, rather than fighting, may also be the reason the Indians were able to buy land near Tama in 1850, which generally was never allowed. He always came to the aid of the white settlers. He offered advice to early settlers, such as always make camp between river and creek. No tornado will strike down between river and tributary. He showed the early settlers where and how to fish, hunt, and plant. His Indians always shared their bounties with the pioneer families. Johnny Greene's pride and joy was his fleet Indian pony named Watsika, which translated means best runner. Greene liked nothing better than to secure a bet with some of the early settlers as to the speed of their respective horses. The race was usually run over a quarter of a mile, and the inevitable ending found Greene's white stocking pony pulling away as they approached the finish line. The wily chief added an otter skin or a beaver fur, and the hope for jingle in the pockets of our pioneers did not materialize. Enos became good friends with Chief Johnny Greene. Johnny Greene told Enos and other settlers in the area many more stories about battles. Although Johnny Greene and his Indians were friends with the settlers, they were enemies of the Sioux Indians that lived in the northern part of Iowa. The land in northwest Iowa was considered neutral land by a treaty signed in 1861, but the lookout was always in order for the Sioux, who had little regard for treaties. Greene told instances when the two tribes were in bloody and awful, fatal confrontations. One such battle took place by Horseshoe Bend. This is Greene County right here. He would tell how he fought the Sioux, even numbers, and always came out victorious. Then the Sioux would propose to fight him 2-to-1 of his braves. Greene killed them in great numbers, and so he allowed the Sioux to double up until they fought the Sioux 5-to-1. When he said his braves were slaughtered by hundreds and the Sioux drove them back. He would finish the recital of his defeat with wild excitement, saying, "Ye braves of Johnny Greene buried on the hills of Cedar Creek, killed by Sioux. Damn Sioux, no good." This battleground was near Cedar Creek in Greene County, where many bones were unearthed and where may still be found flint arrowheads and Indian bones, mementos of a deadly conflict in which Johnny Greene lost many of his brave Indians, and there stand to their right to their own hunting ground. Other settlers soon arrived, and other stories were recorded. One story tells of a pioneer who had to leave his family with very little food while he made the trip for provisions. High water prevented him, there were no bridges in the area, from getting back home for many days. In the meantime, the family provisions were exhausted. The family was at the point of starvation when a young Indian appeared at the door one day asking for food. The mother took the Indian to the cupboard and to the meal chest, showing him they were bare. The Indian walked over to the door, took the rifle off the peg, and disappeared across the prairie, leaving the mother trembling with fright. Within an hour or so, the mother heard a knock at the door. She opened it, and there stood the Indian, a deer slung over his shoulder. Silently, he entered the door, walked across the room, and deposited the deer before the fireplace, replaced the borrowed gun on the peg over the door, and silently disappeared again. The frightened but reassured family had a feast of venison that night. The next day, the father returned with adequate supplies. Along toward evening, who should appear but the Indian? He had returned to see if the family was still in need, and showed great satisfaction when he found the father at home and the family well supplied with the much-needed food. By the fall of 1852, many settlers had gathered in the valley of the Raccoon, and the Buttrick and Davis cabins that had once been solitary became the nucleus of a little settlement. Early that fall, Chief Johnny Greene and his braves, 200 strong, camped near the Buttrick cabin, which the chief, with much ceremony, invited Enos with him on his annual hunting trip to the land of the Sioux. This indeed was a great honor, and Enos accepted the invitation. As far as it is known, he is the only white man to receive such an honor. Enos was furnished an Indian pony to ride by the chief. They camped for a time by a lake such as Enos had never seen, so beautiful like a jewel, in a green gold setting. Anybody know what that would be? Yes. How did you? Like a jewel. The chief told him the name of the lake was Okoboji, a place of rest. A short distance further on was another lake, Minnewakan, signifying spirit water. Tradition says that the Indians regarded this lake with superstitious awe. They believed the waters to be haunted by spirits, and that no Dakota or Sioux ever ventured to cross it in his canoe. They camped for weeks in this hunter's paradise, keeping a sharp lookout for the wily Sioux, bagging enough game such as elk, deer, and game birds of all descriptions native to the prairie, as well as many fur-bearing animals, and late that fall they returned home laden with the kill. Returning home, Enos was now all enthused about what may lay to the west of the Greene County settlement. Over the protests of his wife, Katie, who was content in her home beside Buttrick's Creek, which was named after this Buttrick, Enos set out alone on his pony, which had been a gift from Chief Johnny Greene, riding westward some 20 miles. He liked the country he saw, and so constructed a crude shelter there, thus establishing the first white habitation in what was to become Carroll County. In 1854, Enos moved his family to Carroll County. In October of 1854, Chief Johnny Greene and all his braves camped near the spring about a mile from Enos's house, coming first to ask Enos if they might do so. He informed Enos that his cabin was near the dividing line between the Potawatomis and the Sioux, and he pointed out a well-worn trail, which he called the Warpath, that he and all his braves hated the Sioux with a deep and bitter hatred, and that he had fought many a bloody battle with the Sioux. Around 1856, the Sioux were becoming more abusive and threatening to the whites in this area, causing real uneasiness. The Sioux were threatening to drive out the white settlers and also their Indian friends because they defended the whites. the Sioux became so abusive to the Meskwakis and Pots that a warpath was made between the two tribes, and the declaration that the first of either tribe who was found on the wrong side of the trail would mean a battle between the tribes for supremacy. Both tribes had long been skirmishing over the ownership of these hunting grounds. The line passed between Swan Lake, you know where Swan Lake is, over by Carroll, then known as Crescent Lake because of its shape, and by the Indians as Lake Pashiapau. This area is by present-day Carroll. The Sioux, having many more warriors in the vicinity than their opponents, were just spoiling for trouble. One day, 3 of the Sioux warriors chased a buffalo over the war trail, and as a result were killed by the Potawatomi and Meskwakis. These tribes were trapping on the lake at the time, and unknown to the Sioux, had been receiving reinforcements for several days who brought with them ammunition for their guns. The number of Potawatomi and Meskwaki warriors was 30. They camped in the timber, which was located to the south and southeast side of the lake. Camping here gave them protection and kept secret the number of warriors during the early part of the battle. The Sioux had also been receiving reinforcements. They had 700 warriors ready to fight. The Sioux attacked the next day in the early morning from the northwest after watching the enemy camp. But the Meskwaki and Potawatomi were better armed with guns and ammunition. The Sioux lost over half of their warriors in the first hours of the battle, bringing their numbers down to 300. The Pots and Meskwakis lost very few warriors. Finally, the Meskwakis' ammunition gave out, and the first fierce fighting began, hand-to-hand combat, bows and arrows, spears, tomahawks, and knives. Both tribes fought ferociously, and at the end, only 4 warriors survived. 3 Pots and 1 severely wounded Sioux, who drug himself back to his people. In some way, that chief, Johnny Greene, did not know how, they missed scalping 1 Sioux, who, although wounded, managed to get away. The dead were left to decay in the field. The Indians believed it was honorable to leave the bodies of their warriors on the battlefield. Wild animals tore the bodies to pieces, and only the bones were visible until they were burned in prairie fires. Early settlers in the area found piles of whitened human skulls and bones, rifles, and other weapons. A few years after the battle, Johnny Greene and his wives were invited to a Christmas dinner by an Elm McCurdy, another settler familiar with the chief. After the dinner, the old chief said he was so full he would have to go out and stretch. While out of the doors, he removed his clothing and showed Mr. McCurdy the scars he received in the conflict. Mr. McCurdy said he had 1 scar on the other until it really looked as if he had been carved and recarved. Chief Johnny Greene made what proved to be his last hunting trip through Carroll and Greene counties in 1863. The entire band camped for a night at the old camping ground near the Buttrick Ford. The next morning they were early astir on the move, dragging their lodge poles, one end fastened to the side of the pony, the other end dragging on the ground, extending several feet. The hinder end of the 2 poles fastened together with rawhide to prevent spreading. On these, the squaws piled their camp equipment, also the old Indians who were too infirm to walk or ride a pony. In a month or so, they would return from the hunting ground with the usual supply of venison, and again they camped near the spring. For many years past, they had received a welcome from their old friend Enos. That night, around the campfire, Johnny Greene smoked the peace pipe and recounted for the last time the many adventures of these 2 old friends. He told Enos of the scarcity of game on the plains, that soon the deer and the antelope would be no more, that they had to go much further north to find good hunting. He told him that he was getting old and he was weary and tired. The long hunting trips a hardship, that he would bury the hatchet and scalping knife and hunt no more. They had land near Tama, Iowa. He would return to this reservation to spend the remainder of his days. The next day, the tribe broke camp, and it was with deep regret and tender emotion that Enos said a last farewell to the old chief and true friend of many years. He watched him ride slowly to the east till he and his faithful Indian pony were lost to view in a clump of willows. He noted the regal bearing of the old Indian in spite of his many years, riding his pony with the dignity of the grand old chief he was. In 1867, a picture was secured of Chief Johnny Greene. But first, I have an earlier picture.